My name's Aaron Ellis. Ever since I was 6 or 7, and my teacher wheeled in a heavy TV set and showed my class a cartoon version of the Odyssey, I've been fascinated by strategy. To me, strategy is achieving your ambitions as stuff outside your control tries to stop you. I've practiced it in politics and business, and now I consult on it. This podcast is about understanding the stuff shaping people's environments and how they try to master it, whether in politics, world affairs, business, or pop culture. For this first episode, I talked to my friend Paul Klein. He is a film scholar who used to handle strategy at startups. After sharing our experiences, we have a wide-ranging discussion on everything from why working in hospitality should be mandatory, the interplay of politics and cinema, why George Lucas is one of the best strategists in the film industry, as well as the importance of laughing at fascists. I hope you enjoy our talk. Hi.
Hey there.
Hi, Paul. So I'm guessing, like you, I grew up loving Inside the Actors Studio. And something I loved was the questionnaire that James Lipton would always do at the end.
Yeah.
I'm sort of trying it at the beginning as like a sort of intro to guests. Okay. And it's my sort of variation on it. So, Paul, what's your favorite word?
My favorite word? I did a little thinking about this beforehand because I had a feeling you were going to go in this direction. So I have a word. I don't know if it's my favorite to use, but it's a favorite word that I talk about. And that word is excellence. I think it's a terrific concept. I think it's good for us to strive to be excellent. It doesn't mean that we are the best at something, but it means that we are sort of doing the best. It's something that I look to attain in everything that I do, whether that's like my writing, my research, my scholarship, or just the way I like take care of the house. Excellence is critical. To me, it's a mindset more than anything.
I'm feeling the pressure now. Least favorite word.
Least favorite word. I don't have a least favorite word. Disappointment.
Again, the pressure builds. Favorite swear word.
Favorite swear word. I think I say damn it a lot. I think that's part of my natural vernacular at this point.
Well, I was going to ask are there any notable times in your careers where you've used it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, noticeable. I think the problem is that I use it maybe too often. It's hard to remember exactly when. But damn it is like that perfect explosive, it's got that onomatopoeia sound to it that it just rolls right out and it like encapsulates everything that you're feeling at that moment when it's like, God damn it.
What's your favorite book?
Favorite book? I got a couple. I think it's impossible. I don't like playing favorites because it's an impossible sort of question. So I'll give you a selection of books. One of the most important books to me when I was growing up was The Dharma Bums by Kerouac. It does what On the Road does, but in a more interesting way. And it's very poetic. And I haven't reread it since I was in high school or like early college. So maybe it wouldn't hit me the same way. But when I was, 18 and really feeling everything for the first time in those major ways, The Dharma Bums, it worked for me. And I feel like it made me a better person. It's a book that I often will gift younger friends who are graduating and getting ready for the professional world. So Dharma Bums, one. The other one, two other ones. Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. Danny Meyer is an American restaurateur. He runs the Union Square Hospitality Group. So he opened up Gramercy Tavern in New York and Union Square Cafe in New York, and then eventually Shake Shack, and sort of, now he has the Shake Shack empire. But to me, Danny Meyer's like emphasis on excellence and on service is applicable like across the board. So part of my background is working in the service industry, and I think that it's one of those things that everybody really needs to do at some point, because it changes the way that you see the world, the way that you understand labor and power, and the way that we treat each other. And even though, you know, in a restaurant, it's a very staid setting where things are supposed to happen in certain orders, those orders matter, but you can do it in a way that makes people feel comfortable, feel home, feel welcomed. So it's one of the most important like business texts, I think, that I ever come back to. Setting the Table by Danny Meyer, one that I gift a lot. And if I'm thinking about, you know, business or strategy in this case, it's a book that absolutely comes top of mind. And then a personal favorite that has to do with the work that I do now in film history is a book called The Monster Show, A Cultural History of Horror by a film historian, David J. Schall, who passed away last year. It's just this, you know, sort of monograph about horror movies. I grew up loving Universal monster movies and all the you know, spooky old Dracula, Frankenstein, black and white movies. And David J. Schall puts all of that into sort of the context of the American 20th century. It's just an incredible read. It's really enjoyable. It reads well. It's the kind of work that I want to do as a scholar, where I'm taking sort of really big concepts and thinking about history and making it legible for, I think I first read it when I was 12, making these really big things legible for anyone.
You're going to have to give me a selection of your favorite films now, because
yeah, movies are even harder. People say, well, you know, what are your, I'll give you my Letterboxd top 4. That's the easy one. Modern Times, 1933, Charlie Chaplin. I'm a Charlie Chaplin fanatic. I think he's brilliant. Bring Up Baby, Howard Hawks, 1938. Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant. First time that somebody uses the word gay in a major Hollywood film to sort of mean homosexual. Homosexuality was discussed on screen well before this, and often candidly, but this is the first time that you have somebody like Cary Grant, a major movie star, say, I just went gay all of a sudden while he's wearing a nightgown. It's brilliant. The Searchers.
Allegedly, he was no stranger.
No stranger at all, Mr. Grant. What a beautiful man. And then two others, The Searchers, John Ford, 1956. I think it's a really complicated film that's all about trying to figure out America and figuring out how to reconcile the absolute irreconcilability that is America. You know, how do we move forward as a country that proclaims one thing but consistently does the other thing? It's a fascinating document and a gorgeous movie.
That shot.
Oh, in the John Wayne, Ethan Edwards leaving the doorway. It's a shot that you see all the time now too. I mean, that's the great thing is that once you see it, you realize I've seen this shot a million times before. It's in every movie because it's remarkable. And then Playtime, which is a French film from 1967 by the French comedian Jacques Tati, and it's like. It's Chaplin on steroids. It's all about modernity and how do we sort of, you know, live in this modern society. And Tati is this like mime, basically. He's a French clown. So it's mostly silent. There's just all sorts of visual gags. And it's stunning. If you ever have the chance to see it, especially on 70mm, you should watch it.
What's a sound or noise that you love?
I love the sound of laughter. I love going to a movie theater and listening to other people laugh. I'm a giggler. You will probably, as you're like editing this, will hear me just giggling all the time. So maybe it's just because I appreciate when other people are sort of covering up my own insatiable giggling, but I love listening to people laugh. It's a wonderful feeling.
What's a sound or noise that you hate?
Ooh, you know when you like have a spoon or a fork and it hits you on the teeth? Oh, hate that. It's that's worse than nails on a chalkboard to me.
Do you have any guilty pleasures?
I sometimes will just stop what I'm doing and watch a movie. It could be 2 p.m. and I've been writing or working all day, and I think I can take 90 minutes and pop a disc in, or I'm lucky there's a really small multiplex a few blocks away from my house, so I can just sort of sneak out and go take in a Tuesday afternoon matinee.
It's research.
Yeah, that's what I tell myself every time is, well, I need to do this I study film going and theatrical exhibition. I need to know what it's like to be in a movie theater.
What was the last thing that made you laugh?
The last thing that made me laugh, the last thing that made me, I think, really, really chuckle, we watched for Alfred Hitchcock's birthday, The Trouble with Harry. And it's Hitchcock doing this like English comedy set in autumn Vermont. Little kid stumbles on a body, and then the whole town sort of has to figure out, what do we do with this body? And it's dark and bleak and just like obscenely, devilishly funny. A Hitchcock film that people will often sort of dismiss because it's not what you expect, but I think it's a sleeper hit. It's one of my favorite things.
Is there a fictional character that you imagine yourself to be?
A fictional character I imagine myself to be. Yeah, I like to think of myself a little bit as Chaplin's tramp. He's this flaneur who sort of moves in and out of scenes and sees the world through his own lens. And I like to think that part of what I do is to help illuminate for others the way that I see the world. Chaplin is such a positive force, and the tramp in particular is, he's not a pure agent of chaos because he's not a pure anarchist, but he exposes the ridiculousness of so many situations. And I mean, I sound like I'm on a high horse. Nothing I'm doing is that important, but I like to think that through my work, I'm helping people think about the world in a different way and sort of understand something in a different manner. And if I can even come close to doing a little bit of what Chaplin was doing, I'll be very happy.
So something that occurred to me sort of preparing for this interview, you're a film scholar who's previously handled strategy in startups. And I wondered, did your interest in both of these come from working in movie theaters?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little of my background for people listening is I started working in movie theaters right out of college and really enjoyed it. I've always loved going to the movies, and so I thought, this is a natural thing that you do when you're 18. You get a part-time job, and that turned into running theaters and running operations and writing strategy manuals for theater chain here in the States. Eventually, I sort of found that the industry itself sort of has an upper limit, and I wasn't going to be able to have the professional satisfaction that I really wanted if I stayed at least at that company that I was with. So I made the jump, and this was right at the height of like the Obama era when we're all sort of thinking about technology and innovating, sort of pure millennial kind of stuff. So I made the jump to startups, doing technology startups. But yes, I think that experience in movie theaters really did inform my thinking about startups and startup strategy because, things that I was always striving for in a movie theater setting are applicable elsewhere. So I said my favorite word is excellence. And that was something that, I sort of went on and on about in a movie theater. We want people to have an excellent experience. We're showing films. We have to show them the best way possible. That also means that we're like making the best popcorn possible. And we're charging people $12 for a bag of popcorn. We don't have like a great state-funded movie theater industry like the UK does. So everything's crazy expensive. And I was just constantly thinking about how do we provide the best opportunities to our guests. At the same time, something that I really wanted was more professional support and more professional development. So I was sort of also trying to think, well, how do I operate this business strategically in service of not only our guests, but also our staff, movie theater staffs, largely, younger kids who are in school or just out of school. It's part-time jobs, but there's no reason that job shouldn't be rewarding and offer the same kind of personal development that you would get at a technology startup.
I also have like a hospitality background. I worked as like a barman for a very long time.
Sure.
And there is nothing like hospitality to prepare you for, especially as the customer is right there. And they will let you know if they don't like something or if they do like something, or
right.
The customer's right there. It needs to be excellent right there, the point of delivery. It's, I think some people can find startups a sort of high pressure environment, but I think if you've worked in hospitality, it seems very chill compared to a startup environment.
And I mean, an email job is an email job. It is obviously very high stress, and the stakes can be really high, especially if we're talking about, using millions of dollars of venture capital to try to make your dream happen with a bunch of, when I joined the startups, it was always, these sort of young kids were trying to make something happen that hasn't happened before or change the industry, or these very lofty goals. So the pressure is there, but having that service background, I think it prepares you for thinking on your feet, for managing people. And not just, I don't mean that just in the traditional sense of managing subordinates, but managing the expectations of other people on your team, working across teams to make things happen. Those are really incredible skills. Again, I think everybody should there should be a national gap year for everyone to sling some popcorn.
So if there's like a Peace Corps for hospitality.
Yes. Yeah. We need it.
So my definition of strategy is that it's trying to achieve your ambitions as stuff outside your control tries to stop you. You were chief of staff at 2 startups and also a strategic advisor to another. So I'm kind of curious about your experiences dealing with all the stuff and trying to outmaneuver it to achieve what you need to achieve.
That's a great definition of strategy. I always approached strategy as I think it is strategic thinking is being able to develop a plan and change the plan as necessary, because a plan exists in a vacuum. You can sort of say how you're going to play the game, but the game is going to change. So strategy, thinking strategically, is to me outlining what might happen. And I think one of the things that I really enjoyed as a chief of staff, and I think this is just a thing that I like to do, is I think about where are all of the opportunities for this to just go completely off the rails. Where can something go wrong? You can't always prepare for all of those things, but if you can identify points of conflict, potential opportunities for danger, then you are much more prepared to be able to pivot where necessary or to execute the plan as you want to execute it.
So I think there's a difference between strategies and plans.
Sure.
And sort of for me, a plan is sort of A to B to C to D. And then a strategy is getting from A to B while someone's shooting at you. And something I've found really instructive, and this is film, that I think really highlights the differences, is Double Indemnity. And the Walter Neff's, the insurance salesman, is an expert planner.
Mm-hmm.
He plans the perfect murder, and then Phyllis, Barbara Stanwyck's character, is the perfect strategist, because although Walter plans everything step by step, it allows for no deviation. Whereas Barbara Stanwyck, she has an idea of what she wants, which is she wants her husband dead in such a way that like financially rewards her.
Right.
And she is open to the many possibilities to bring that about. And when sort of Walter Neff sort of shows up at her house, is talking about buying car insurance, she immediately spots the opportunity of, if I get accident insurance and I bump off my husband, I'm going to be rich. And then she starts working on that. And then Walter then comes up with this brilliant plan of getting the husband... Sorry if I'm spoiling it for listeners, but it is like 70 years old, so you've had enough time. He tricks the husband into buying the accident insurance. They then murder the husband. The fact that shortly before he breaks his leg is seen as a bonus, because then, the police conclude that he got caught up in his crutches on the train and he fell off and he died.
Mm-hmm.
And the insurance company is going to pay out the accident claim. And then Walter's boss says, why didn't he put in a claim for the accident policy when he broke his leg? And then that just sinks the whole plan. So for me, it's the two differences. It's sort of the strategist like Barbara Stanwyck is sort of open to lots of things. Walter then decides to knock off Barbara Stanwyck and comes up with an excellent plan for how to get away with it. And then Barbara Stanwyck pulls out a gun, which he wasn't expecting. So for me, that's like the sort of two differences to my mind.
Well, I think that you bring up, a really great point. Maybe we play fast and loose with the word strategy and the word plan. But where I found, and where I think we can identify companies that do this today, or politicians, or sort of, whoever, right? Strategy applies to all of us. Is people getting set on a plan and thinking that having the plan is the strategy, exactly what you said. Whereas a strategy is about being able to pivot because you still know, what you want. What is the objective that you have? But where I think people struggle is that they either make a plan and stick to the plan and refuse to deviate from the plan, in which case they fail because they sort of keep doing the thing that isn't working, or they refuse to plan entirely because they just know what they want and they're just going to go out and get it. But it's sort of this strategy, I think, then is actually this like in between liminal state between active, having a really solid plan and having no plan at all. It is this thing that exists where you are thinking about different outcomes all the time and making micro decisions based on the outcomes that you see as likely or not likely.
I'm sort of curious if there were any films that like helped you with this work, doing strategy and startup.
Yeah, I've got a couple that I think are important. One movie is called The Restaurateur. It's a documentary from 2010, so it's very sort of straightforward documentary about business and planning, and it's about Danny Meyer opening up a restaurant in New York City, and it's I mean, it's great. And Danny Meyer is working with, at that point, Tom Colicchio is the head chef that he's working with. Tom Colicchio, who is now the co-host of Top Chef and has his own massive restaurant empire. That was a film that really got me thinking about how do you take one restaurant, Danny Meyer started with Union Square Cafe, and turn that into this massive empire where you have all of these restaurants across the country, not just in New York City. How do you take a Shake Shack, which is a massive publicly traded company now. It's actually been spun out from Union Square Hospitality Group. Started out as a hot dog cart in Madison Square. And, the sort of goal was to make money to help revive the park. So it was like a charity organization at first, and they just sold hot dogs out of a cart. And now, every airport in North America has a Shake Shack in it. So the restaurant tour is sort of my safe answer, my easy answer. But I think once you start thinking about strategy in the way that someone like you or I do, it becomes kind of all encompassing, and we're sort of always thinking about it. I keep talking about Charlie Chaplin. Modern Times that I mentioned is, I think, a really beautiful film for thinking about the strategy of getting through the worst. Modern Times is this series of vignettes about humanity crusading in the pursuit of happiness. It's this satire about industry, about the Great Depression, about labor and the police, about communism, the red menace of the 1920s and 1930s. And the reason why I think that it actually exemplifies thinking strategically is because the end of the film is all about affording a new way of approaching the world and saying that I'm not going to let all these things that I can't control get in my way. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And so the film famously ends with Charlie Chaplin's Tramp and the romantic interest, Paulette Goddard playing, she's called the gamine. They walk off, not into a sunset, as would be traditional, but into a sunrise. And they walk off together. The Tramp turns to the gamine and he says, "Buck up, never say die." And I think it's a powerful message of optimism and sort of saying that in the face of these modern times and all of the changes that they've brought and the challenges they've given us as a people, we have the opportunity to think differently about how we're going to approach it. We can't change modern times for all of us, but we can change our response to it, which is a strategic way of thinking about the world rather than letting it get us down. We say, buck up. This is the film that ends with smile. He turns to her and he, tells her to smile. And that's a fantastic way of looking at the world for me. I mean, maybe I'm a cockeyed optimist to an extreme, but I think that I would rather be thinking strategically about how to be happy and how to make things work for myself and for those around me than to be, a doom and gloomer about it all.
Not as role models, but I started watching documentaries about the baddies.
Sure.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yes.
Because I was sort of fascinated by in the case of Elizabeth Holmes, how did people with no product convince so many people to invest? Mm-hmm. How did she do it how do you create that sort of P.T. Barnum kind of excitement to get people interested in a product? Mm-hmm. But then also how quickly things can go wrong in a startup.
Yep.
In the case of, say, a WeWork, where you get sort of blinded by the sort of heady atmosphere of money and expectations and that you are changing the world and it's essentially sublet office space but you are remaking the world, and how quickly that can just fall apart without any kind of proper strategic thinking. So I started watching them, and then on the other hand, it's sort of I guess more conventional when it comes to strategy, but and this goes back to my I think I've always been fascinated by strategy since like a kid.
Huh.
And I don't know which started first, because I've always loved The Guns of Navarone and Where Eagles Dare.
I haven't seen that one.
So, Where Eagles Dare is excellent. It is Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood, and have you seen Guns of Navarone?
Long time ago, yeah.
So, they're both based on books by the same guy, and in Guns of Navarone, it's very much like Gregory Peck is the master strategist who he has an idea of how to achieve his objective, which is blowing up the guns. But there is so much stuff going around that he quietly, without telling anyone, tries to anticipate the many things that can go wrong.
Right.
Sometimes having to be a bit economical with the truth to make sure that they come about, like sort of telling the injured major that they're not blowing up the guns now. British forces are going to invade the island from the Turkish side, because he knows that when the Germans capture the injured major and they pump him full of truth serum, he will tell them that the operation's off. And David Niven, when he finds out, is horrified by that. And he sort of says to Gregory Peck, you've used an important human being in this sort of cynical way. But as far as Gregory Peck concerned, it's necessary to achieve the thing. And then Where Eagles Dare is like that on steroids. Because it's a much darker film than Guns of Navarone.
Okay.
Because Richard Burton is again the master strategist who, in contrast to Guns of Navarone, the ostensible objective in the film, which is to rescue an American general. Basically, this American general knows the plans for D-Day. So they need to go in and rescue this general from this impregnable fortress in Bavaria before the Nazis can interrogate him and find all about D-Day. That's actually a lie. Because actually it's an operation to flush out double agents. And it's the most elaborate thing. And basically Richard Burton's the only one who knows this. And so there's constant changes of like who's who and what's what and why is all this happening, and switches of allegiances, and always it's Richard Burton nudging everyone to a pre-imagined destination that he wants to get them at. And he keeps everything secret, but it's always him sort of operating. So for me, that was very much imagining me as Richard Burton. Yeah, so they were mine of like sort of, it's a much more sort of egotistical and heroic than yours.
No, but you bring up an interesting point when thinking about these movies or thinking about Elizabeth Holmes. I was thinking about the Fire Festival as well. But a lot of what startups are doing and have to do is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I mean, I think that's all business, right? And where startups get in trouble is where they sort of lose sight of what are the smoke and mirrors that are necessary to compete, to be part of this ecosystem that rewards a little bit of, plumping, of primping the truth and straight up lying. Those are different things. I think that it would be easy, to sort of say, oh, well, if startups are lying, they're wrong. It's unethical. But the reality is that all businesses, startups or otherwise, are being judicious with the truth at any given moment for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons are more ethical than others, but we're kidding ourselves if we think that that's not the way the world works. Even major multinational corporations, they're constantly breaking rules or lying, and for them, they know that they'll get a fine from a regulatory agency somewhere, a couple $100,000. It doesn't matter if you're a major banking firm or something, but a startup like Theranos is just sort of the extreme version, or a startup like WeWork is the extreme version of kind of every startup that is in a WeWork right now, or was in a WeWork 10 years ago. You're trying to make it seem like you're bigger and more important than you are at any given moment because you are trying to get acquired or trying to sell, whatever that objective is.
Something I took from the whole Theranos thing is to always lead with a physical product whenever I was sort of in any meetings, to show that, like, we are not a Theranos because here is our product.
Yep.
But then the difficulty is convincing them that this product is then going to change the world, and that's where it's like, how do you ape that kind of hype? And something that sort of occurred to me is you probably had this experience yourself with sort of VCs and stuff like that, of like, if you try to be sort of nice and courteous and helpful and sort of eager to show why you would be such great partners, they don't like you. But if you sort of pretend that you're better than them and you don't even want their money, it creates a sort of a psychological need in these people to be like, what am I missing out on?
Right.
So for me, it was always like, how do you create that psychological trick for the greater good of you trying to achieve your strategic objective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the psychology of it, it's the psychology of strategy, I suppose, in a lot of ways. And that's probably a whole nother podcast for you.
I've got many seasons to come. So several years ago, you decided to sort of switch careers and become a film scholar. Yeah. And I noticed that you like to do something which I love to do, which is kind of using films as a way to explain international relations. And I love to hear about your argument of High Noon as an allegory for the Cold War.
Oh, yes, absolutely. High Noon is one of my favorite movies. I love Westerns for a variety of reasons. But one of them I really enjoy is Westerns provide this really like beautiful canvas for filmmakers to explore contemporary issues through, the mythic West, this America that didn't exist in the way that we think it did. It existed, of course, but the stories that we tell are not actually about 1965. They're stories about 1952. So High Noon is a film from 1952. Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly in her film debut. And it's this film by Fred Zinnemann and Carl Foreman. It's written by Carl Foreman, who ends up on the blacklist during the McCarthy years. And High Noon really is this movie that is exploring, what the McCarthy era was like for a lot of Americans. So in the film, Gary Cooper plays this Marshal, Will Kane, who is the retiring marshal of the town of Hadleyville, which is a fake town in New Mexico territory. And as he's retiring to marry his wife, Amy, played by Grace Kelly, he is told that this criminal Frank Miller is coming back to town on the noon train, and Frank Miller is going to come and wreak havoc and sort of destroy the town. And Will, the marshal, had previously extirpated the Miller gang. And what happens for the next 90 minutes is great. This sort of clock starts and the whole movie is sort of, Will has to go through the town looking for people who will stand with him to stand off against the Miller gang. And what he finds is that no one is willing to help him out. All of the townspeople who he previously had these wonderful working relationships with, his friends, his former lovers, nobody will do anything. And so it really comes out, and Carl Foreman, who wrote it, has said, very much so, this is very didactic. This is what this film is about. It's about the House Un-American Activities Committee and the way that they would, Senator McCarthy and all of his goons would bring forward people and demand that they turn over their friends and relatives and colleagues. And nobody was willing to stand up for it. The reason the era existed for so long, that all of these things happened, that hundreds of people lost their jobs, was because no one was willing to do the right thing and say no. Obviously, some people refused, but not enough people did. And it took a really long time to get through it. But it's a tremendous film about this moment in time. It's not about 1865 New Mexico. It's about Hollywood and Washington, D.C. in the middle of the 1950s.
It's also one of those films that's very much like, what would you do? Like, would you agree to join this posse and potentially get killed? Or is it better to just keep your mouth shut and what's going to happen is what's going to happen anyway, so why should I risk my life? It's kind of one of those films as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a film that it so famously pissed off John Wayne. Wayne went and made a Rio Bravo as a response to it, because he's, John Wayne's sort of response was, this is the most un-American film possible. And it's sort of wild to watch today because it feels so deeply about American values, about neighborliness and doing the right thing. I mean, there's no world in which Will Cain is not the good guy in this movie. His wife, Amy, is a Quaker. She's anti-violence. Like, it's a film that is like so on the nose that when you read about the right-wing reaction to it, it kind of boggles your mind. And lots of movies are like this. I mean, I keep talking about Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin got run out of the country because of these very things, because of the Red Scare and because of columnists like Hedda Hopper and people like John Wayne, who thought someone like Charlie Chaplin, who preached a politics of peace and brotherliness, camaraderie, were dangerous to American values.
I'm very sure you've seen it. The Robert Downey Jr. biopic about Chaplin. Something that's always stuck in my mind is there's a particular scene where the Great Dictator is playing, and the tramp, who is masquerading as the Hitler character, starts talking about brotherly love and peace and everything like that. And then someone throws a tomato at the screen and calls him a commie.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of the issues that we have today in America are kind of, they're not the same issues, but they're issues that are informed by this very moment in time, by the 1950s. The fact that we have, the candidate for a major political party talking about communism like it's a real threat to the world in 2024 is again, it's mind-boggling. It's the same sort of fear-mongering language that was used in the 1950s by the same right-wing extremists to try to not conserve the status quo, but to be regressive about it. I think that's one of the most interesting things about our conservative politics today is they're not conservative. They're not about maintaining things the way they are. They're about regression.
Hating on trans people. That's essentially what the modern right is about.
Sure.
When I saw the thing about High Noon in the Cold War, it reminded me of a book I read years ago called The Godfather Doctrine.
Okay.
And it's a very slim, not well argued book. It was sort of written I want to say 2007, 2008, and essentially the argument was American foreign policy had been too dominated by the Sonny Corleone mentality, which was the neoconservatives. And it was quick to violence, it was very unstrategic, it was reactive, and actually American foreign policy had to be more like Michael Corleone, which was diplomatic and led with diplomacy and didn't resort to violence. And at the time when I read this, I was like, have they watched the films? Because Michael Corleone's only diplomatic in the sense of he doesn't tell you he's going to kill you, but he is going to kill you. He's not. He's a good role model as a strategist, but he is not diplomatic, friendly, leave violence aside sort of type.
The Godfather is. I think those are films like Taxi Driver is another American film. I think these are films that people think they understand, and often don't approach them very critically. And so you have a character like any of the Corleones or Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, and I think a 16-year-old boy walks out of it and says like those guys are onto something. They've got it figured out, and they haven't quite grasped that. No, these films are asking larger moral questions about who we want to be as a people, and providing a view of somebody maybe we don't want to be.
I was listening to your interview about Titanic and Titanic films as sort of queer films. And I have a theory that The Godfather is actually a queer film, and parts 1 and 2 are queer films. And I have a theory that Michael Corleone is actually a closeted gay. And it's very much a story of him having to bury who he is for the sake of the larger family. And then he marries, Diane Keaton. Mm-hmm. He is obviously a homosexual. And then in the later films, there's his live-in boyfriend, Al Neri. So that's my...
I love it.
Godfather is gay theory. Another focus of yours in films is sort of films as a business. So I'm kind of interested, like, what makes a good strategist in the film industry?
It's a great question. I think like a good strategist in the film industry is a good strategist anywhere. And to go back to some of the things we've said before, they're people that are identifying opportunities and looking for paths to get those. And they're sometimes playing it a little bit, close to the chest, making decisions that seem unpopular or, crazy, for lack of a better word, decisions that make most people go, why are we doing that? I was thinking, who are some of like the great film strategists? And one name that comes to mind is George Lucas, in Star Wars. Obviously, 2020 vision, we can look back and say, well, of course he's a great strategist. He created Star Wars. It's this massive international franchise, some of the highest grossing films of all time. But when George Lucas first was pitching Star Wars, he was rejected by every studio. He was trying to make a film about the Vietnam War, and it's in space, and, America is the bad guy. America is the evil empire. And when he finally was able to sell it to 20th Century Fox, part of the reason why they bought it was he reserved the rights to all the merchandising for himself. And they said, we don't need that. This movie, we're going to make this movie. He was a known name, right? He wasn't nobody. He had made American Graffiti a few years before, which was a massive hit. But 20th Century Fox thought, we don't need this. So they didn't get sequel rights. They didn't get the merchandising rights. And George Lucas knew that the way that these movies were going to get made was through toys. And Lucas went Kenner, and they sold toys before they even had the toys made. They like Christmas 1977, you went and you bought like an empty box from the store that said like coming soon Luke Skywalker action figures, and they used that money to make the action figures and the next ones. And Boba Fett is in Empire Strikes Back because they started selling a Boba Fett action figure before the movie got made. I think thinking about film strategy, someone like George Lucas is somebody who's obviously playing the long game, thinking about how he's going to do something and make it successful. That is the result of a strategic decision to make the movie for a little bit less money, but do the thing that, know that you really want what you really want, and finding different ways of getting to it.
I didn't realize he was such a seize the whole board kind of filmmaker.
Yeah. George Lucas is a filmmaker that I love. And as a filmmaker, his batting average isn't necessarily great, depending on like your aesthetic tastes. He only directed the first Star Wars movie, and then Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were directed by other people. And then he came back and directed the prequels, and we can have a whole other conversation about those movies. I was thinking about Lucas the other day because I just saw Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a Steven Spielberg film, but a character co-created by George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are famously friends. And there's this great bit at the beginning of Temple of Doom, right after the opening credits, where they do Anything Goes in Mandarin, and it's this great Busby Berkeley number, and they pull out and they're at Club Obi-Wan, and it's this it's this little like,
I've not seen that before. It's
great. It's it's this little Easter egg. We're used to Easter eggs today. Sort of culturally, I think we talk about them and think about them, but I was thinking about it because there's this sort of like recursive language going on, especially in George Lucas and Steven Spielberg's films of the 1980s, where they're constantly referencing each other. A Spielberg film, E.T., when Elliot shows E.T. his toys, he's showing him Star Wars toys. And so there are these like references to these other movies, and they're references to a specific filmmaker. And obviously these guys are friends. It's this like tongue-in-cheek thing. But I also wonder, if that isn't a strategic decision to further embed your films and your like IP, for lack of a better word, further into the cultural imagination. There's no reason for E.T. to see a little kid in a Yoda costume when they go trick-or-treating. I mean, it's like, narratively, it doesn't need to happen. But I think that it's actually doing more work than just being like a cute little, hey, did you notice that thing? I think that there is a mindful decision happening to make these films more important because they're referenced by other contemporary films. It ingrains those films further into the culture at that moment. And I think that's one of the reasons we are where we are today in terms of like our IP filmmaking. Maybe that's a bad side effect of this, but it's a really interesting thing. And I think it's not just that these movies are great movies that we talk about them. It's that these movies are talking about themselves as well.
I saw your tweets about going to see E.T. The other week, and something that you wrote made me think of who is a good strategist in the film industry. There's the tweet about someone gasped, "Oh,"
this little kid.
Yeah. And so that kind of made me think of there's the strategy of putting the mechanics of a film together, like the production, the cast, the filming, the sort of the managing the circus kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's that aspect of strategy, and then there's also what effect the director wants the audience have in reaction. So that's why I was sort of thinking of Spielberg as a strategist, not only the pulling together of the machine, but also then the desired effect that he wants in reaction to whatever this machine is projecting out.
Spielberg is, he's an incredible filmmaker for this reason. I always say that, he's this sort of master melodramatist. He's the master melodramatist. He's a master of melodrama. But I think it's a strategic choice that you make as a filmmaker. One of the mentors that I work with is this just incredibly smart woman, Despina Kakudaki, here at American University in DC. And she has a lot of work. She does a lot of research on melodrama. One of the things that she pointed out to me a couple of years ago was that melodrama is actually the sort of basic grammar of Hollywood filmmaking. So by that, I mean, melodrama is about a push and pull of affect, of emotion. And it is about trying to elicit sort of pure emotional responses. And one of the strategies that you have for doing that is by sort of constantly creating tension and thinking that the problem has been resolved, but oh no, there's one more thing. Oh no, there's one more thing. And Spielberg does that. And so there's this moment in E.T. where E.T. is finally at home with Elliot and his siblings, and they have to go to school. So they're all in the car going off to school, and the mother hears a thump upstairs because E.T. is bumbling around upstairs, and she turns and she starts going up the stairs, and it's this moment of tension because the adult shouldn't know about E.T. We already are worried about what's going to happen to E.T. And even a friendly adult like the mother might not react in a friendly way. And it's this little thing, but it creates this suspense. And every sequence has a little bit of that. And at the end, I think it's one of the reasons why everyone cries so much in E.T. is because there's constant creation of tension about what will happen to this cute little alien, and you just want the best for him.
This actually kind of segues to the Harris-Walz campaign. You tweeted something about how the cameras they are using to film their rallies, they're using a sort of shallow depth of field that gives like the rallies a sort of cinematic look, in contrast to how you describe the cheap reality TV aesthetics of the Trump campaign.
Sure.
And it made me think about how the Harris-Walz campaign is sort of cinematic in more ways than one. There's firstly what I think is the hero's journey that the Democrats have been on. There was the very bad period, end of June, beginning of July, where it looked like everything was over, and sort of it was the low point in the hero's journey, and now it's the rebirth and the sort of the going on. Then there's what I thought was probably a very deliberate creation of tension with the running mate process, where who's it going to be? And there were no leaks from Harris's team. So there was all speculation about it could be Shapiro, it could be Walz, it could be Bashar, it could be Roy Cooper. It then brought all these people to the fore. And it's like you start to get invested in the melodrama of which of these is it going to be. And then there's what I also think is it's kind of a 1-2 punch from the Harris campaign. On the one hand, there are these small, viral, Sorkin-esque moments where, like, the heckler trying to interrupt Kamala Harris, and, she says, if you want Donald Trump to win, say it, otherwise I'm speaking. That sort of Sorkin-esque, like, it's the... you get it in The West Wing and in American President, where it's like the situations where the viewer wants the character to say the thing that they ought to say, which in sort of Sorkin-esque films they do, and it's like, go you. But in actuality, the politicians keep their mouths shut, and those moments pass by. So the fact that the Harris campaign is leaning into those moments that then become viral and then go all over TikTok and Instagram. And then the other hand, there are these sort of epic visuals, like Air Force Two landing at a rally and taxiing right up to the crowd. So there's this sort of combination of very small moments up close the sort of Sorkin-esque moments, and then there's the big epic sort of visuals.
Yeah.
And I think that like all of that is what's sucking up the media attention, because it's so much grander than what the Trump campaign has managed to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that going back to the sort of first point that you make about the depth of field in this was the rally where they announced Tim Walz as the running mate. My pointing that out was that meaning happens at the level of the image. So one of the things that I'm really interested in as a film scholar is how do films communicate what they mean, not just the narrative content, but sort of, what else is happening. And one of the tools that a filmmaker has, one of the strategies that a filmmaker has, is the use of the image itself, for better or for worse. So the Harris-Walz campaign, the live stream that they put up is one in which the candidates are in focus, but the sea of people behind them and all of the signs are out of focus. My point with that tweet was that it reads a little bit more cinematically, so that puts it into an immediate contrast with the other campaign. And look, I got a lot of responses to it, and you've got people on the other side of the aisle who say, well, movies are fake, so I don't want this from news, which I don't agree with their politics at all. I'll be very, very clear about that. But it's a valid point that one might not want a cinematic look from their politics. And I do worry in general about the movieification of politics in the way that, at least in America, and I think is also likely the case over there, in the same way that we've sort of gamified our politics and turned them into sporting events. Elections shouldn't be sporting events. These are real things that are happening, and their policies impact a lot of us. So it shouldn't be about who's winning, as if it were a boxing match. But I digress. But yes, you have a strategy as a campaign advisor or the videographer for the campaign about how you're going to communicate your message. And I think that the message that the Harris campaign is communicating is not that it's fake and it's cinematic, but that they value excellence. One of the visual cues that we look for when we compare a high-budget Hollywood production and a low-budget film or a student film or reality television are things like depth of field. So they're communicating something to us. I read it as a communication about about excellence, about hiring people who know what they're doing to do the job and to do it well to the highest standards. And, that stands in stark contrast to a campaign that only hires the stupidest people in the room.
4 seasons, total landscaping.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. And so, it's not just cinematic. It conveys a sense of responsibility to a form. They're using the formal techniques of videography, of cinematography, to communicate a message. And that's an important thing to be on the lookout for, whether the meaning is right or wrong, whether my reading of it is correct or, someone on the other side's reading is correct. That part is sort of irrelevant. The part that matters is that meaning is happening at the level of the image. That's a strategic decision that someone somewhere is making, and it's on us as informed citizens to be able to parse that communication.
Sort of famously, Walz made the comment about how Republicans are weird, which infuriated so many on the right. Because it's true. And you wrote a great article about how the Great Dictator, as a way of making fun of very horrible but also incredibly weird people, and just taking the energy out of these people because they can't bear to be laughed at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason, so the article that you mentioned, thank you for your nice words, sort of looks at this 1940 film, The Great Dictator, which is a Charlie Chaplin film where he sort of lampoons Nazi Germany. It's important to sort of note the film is 1940, so it was being made before all of the atrocities were known. But Chaplin made the movie because he understood that these people don't want to be laughed at. In fact, that's the worst thing that we can possibly do to them, because they want us to be terrified of them. And when you laugh at something that is supposed to be terrifying, I mean, we've all seen a scary movie that didn't land, right? And when you're in the audience and we start laughing at the effects, it's no longer a scary movie, it's comedy. That's a huge boon for us. And so, yeah, Walz calling these guys, J.D. Vance, weird, I actually think is a very effective strategy for taking the piss out of them, because it deprives them of their power to abuse us. You can't abuse me if I'm laughing at you. And so it's laughing at these weirdos is a way of exploiting their own fears in the way that they try to exploit our fears, right? They want us to be scared of our rights being taken away. They want us to be scared of a Christo-fascist state. So we can do the same thing. We can exploit their fears. Their concern is that we're not going to take them seriously, that we know that they're not actually big, strong men, but they're the tiniest people in the room. They're very small, very sad people. And calling them weird is so simple and so effective, because it just gets right under their skin. They know that they're weird.
All the couch memes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating from a strategic level, thinking about the couch thing, because it's not planned. It was a joke that somebody tweeted out, but it's amazing how, again, it's really getting under their skin, and they're complaining about Democrats, liberal people lying about these things. And there's a difference between, there's gradations in sort of untruths, and a meme that everybody acknowledges is a joke is not lying. Whereas lies about, let's say, the president's place of birth, is a lie. There is a difference. It's a shame that we even have to think about why there is a difference between those things.
I literally screamed when Walz made that couch joke. I was watching it live and I literally screamed, because again it was one of those Sorkin-esque, saying the thing that you as the audience want the character to say but never do in real life. Mm-hmm. And it becomes viral because it's that sort of, oh my god, they've said the thing that those kind of people don't usually say.
Yeah, I mean, it's this campaign is fascinating because we're watching in real time the Democratic Party sort of take back some of the mantles of quote unquote real people, which is a pejorative label that the right has used against their own constituents for a long time. There's no such thing as a real or fake America. But to see the Democratic Party sort of say we're going to speak like a worker, like a laborer, is really interesting to see them take back the mantle of personal choice, the freedom to make personal choice. I mean, the Republican Party in America right now is they're the dog that caught the bus. They were able to successfully overturn decades of jurisprudence about abortion and reproductive rights in this country. And what do you do now? Like you can't be the party of personal freedom if you are making it impossible for women to make decisions about their own bodies.
Before we wrap up, are there any films which you think people should just watch?
Oh gosh, I've named like 10 movies in the last hour. If you watch a Charlie Chaplin movie, and it is not modern times or The Great Dictator. You should watch City Lights, which is from 1931. So it is a film. Chaplin's interesting because he continues to make silent films after the transition to sound films, which occurs in 1929 and later. So 1931 is this great moment where it's essentially a silent film. If you've never seen a silent film before, it's a great introduction to it because it reads in such a contemporary way that you have no idea how rich the silent film world is, and it's a great intro. But it's another one of these movies that is about, a little man making it happen for himself in the face of, rising inequality and America. It's a great movie.
Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Paul again for being the first guest on my show. If you want to read his article on Chaplin and the Great Dictator, the link is included in the episode info, as well as the handles to his socials. If you enjoyed our discussion, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and commented on whichever platform you're listening. If you're curious about some of the books we mentioned, and you also want to support independent stores in the UK, please check out my page on bookshop.org. The link is also in the episode info. Next week, I'll be talking to acclaimed historian Anna Reid about the Russian Civil War, why it's an awkward period of history for Vladimir Putin, and why it's relevant to the war in Ukraine today.